Hey everybody, this is Josh
and Carolyn
with Homesteading Family, and welcome to episode 10.
10.
2 digits.
Wow.
All right,
Yay.
getting up there. Episode 10 of the Pantry Chat. Today we're going to talk about how to plan your garden. Share some of our tips and tricks and strategies
Right?
with producing at least 75% of our own veggies.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot for our family, that's for sure.
It sure is. It's a big project, and it takes a lot of thought, strategy, and planning to get there.
Yeah.
But first, let's catch up for a couple minutes,
Right.
answer a question or two, and then we'll dive into the topic. So what's going on?
Whew. Right now we are in that spring rush before all the growth starts.
Yeah.
The snow's gone, and we're just starting to see the grass start greening up. The lilac buds are just starting to swell. So we're going to have lilacs in 3 weeks, 2-3 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah,
You think
depends
so?
on the weather.
Yeah.
But
So we are kind of in this race against the weeds, against everything else to get our garden reclaimed from the last owners. So,
well, and it's a short season here. A friend and I were just talking about how he used to live over in Washington and how they had a pretty good transition from winter to spring, and how here it's like the snow melts and bam, you've got a couple weeks to get ahead of it before the growth is just overrunning you, and you have just so much to do to keep everything at bay.
Right.
And so it's really short, and you got to hit it hard.
You got to hit it
so
hard.
we're all hands in the soil.
Right,
right
absolutely. And for those of you guys who've been following us for a while, you know we're at a new homestead this year, and it has a lot of really good garden infrastructure
it's got
to it.
fantastic infrastructure.
We've got, I think I counted 80 raspberry plants the other day, but the problem is none of these perennials have been maintained for the last several years, so they're just completely overgrown, and we need to get them back under control. So that's what I have been doing.
And
what you've been doing.
Yeah. Well, I've been working on the main crop, and kids are kind of going back and forth between us. And you have really tackled the berries and the grapes, and getting those under control, and just fabulous job. I mean,
thank you.
Had to get rid of all the grass, trim them back, adding compost, adding mulch, really amending the soil. They just haven't had input for a few years, and we need to breathe some new life into them.
Yeah, and we've had some questions this week about how we're getting that back, how we're dealing with that.
Yeah.
And I have actually been removing all the sod and actually ripping it out, getting it all out, all the grass stems I can get out, and then putting down compost and lots of mulch.
Yeah, and we're going to have to do a lot of sheet mulching this year. It's such a big space for us. We're using landscape cloth. That's something I don't usually prefer to use. But there's a lot of grasses, and we're just it's definitely a race to keep that under control and get our productivity up to where we need it in this first year garden.
Right.
But we can do it, and most of that is in soil amendments, in composting and mulching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're doing it. So that's what you've been doing.
Yeah,
too,
really that's both of us. Yeah, you've been focusing on the perennials, and I've been focusing on the main crop annual space.
Right.
And getting it cleaned up, and just getting ready to till the soil. We don't usually till too much, but this is compact. It hasn't been used. It's been covered in plastic. I don't know if they drove tractors over it or what. So I'm creating permanent beds, so it's a lot more work this year. Next year it'll be a breeze.
Oh, good.
Comparatively, but got to make new rows and loosen up the soil. So we are digging in.
We're really getting to it.
But a lot of fun. It's great to be getting outside and getting the kids out there. And the asparagus bed.
Oh,
you guys rehabbed the asparagus bed. 50
put
crowns?
In 50 new asparagus crowns, and we
so
put in the 3-year-old crowns, so hopefully we'll be able to eat off of it this spring. Some of them are just starting to sprout, so I think it'll just be a few weeks and we'll be eating asparagus.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah.
And the greenhouse is really taking off.
Right.
We've got greens coming up, so we will be into fresh greens in 3 weeks for max, I think.
Oh, I am
As long as the weather continues to warm up.
Yeah, it's time for that.
So it is rocking. We're just cranking away here.
Yep.
Let's see, we've got a couple of questions.
Good.
One just kind of fun one that we'll make a nod to. Tammy, I can't say your last name, sorry, asked about our cups, our coffee mugs, and where we get these.
Our coffee mugs. We love our coffee mugs.
We love these. These are actually handmade by a local guy, a friend of ours.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we were just talking before we got on film here, if he has anything Online, Mustache is getting into coffee. We don't know if he has anything online, so we'll check it out. They're awesome mugs, and they actually were made for each one of us. So
yeah,
really, really cool.
That's a good one.
And okay, so the question for the day is from Shara Ayers, I hope. This comes from last week's video you posted here. And this is for Carolyn. How have you adjusted to butchering?
Okay.
Did you grow up butchering? And how, as a mom, do you deal with handling death on one side and turning right around and nurturing a child on the other, and how does that fit into the homesteading life?
This is a really good question. Amazingly enough, I've had this exact conversation with actually a lot of moms who want so badly to have really good quality meat for their family, yet there seems to be this real, I don't know, it's such a juxtaposition for having babies and pregnancy, and you're nurturing all these people, and then the actual killing can be kind of challenging. And so, for me, while I don't have any ethical issues with it, I know that our animals are all raised really well, have great lives. I have found that just removing myself from the actual killing of the animal has been really helpful. I know I can do it, I have done it, but I have no problems with the cleaning of the animal or helping with the butchering process. But the actual taking of the life for me, it's a little easier on my mom sensibilities if I can let the guys in the family take care of that. So that's the way that I have dealt with that personally. I like having the knowledge of how to do it properly and humanely. And so I definitely don't have a problem with knowing it and watching it. I just don't like pulling the trigger if I have the option.
So just that one level of removal.
Right.
Just more with taking the life, when you can step back from that as far as processing the animals the rest of the way, that doesn't really
I just don't
body.
have a problem with that. I did not grow up with butchering anything. That was not part of our family culture at all. So I can remember fishing as a very young child, maybe once or twice. So I just really wasn't around that. But I think when you know how much better the lives are of the animals that you raise yourself, and how much better the meat is for your family, it just, really helps to get over that kind of hurdle of not wanting to do something.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's challenging even for me. I grew up hunting a little bit, not a lot, grew up fishing, and we have been involved with livestock since before we were married, some form or another, and it comes pretty naturally. It's never been easier, and it's actually getting harder. As we spend more years working with the animals, especially as the kids come more into the picture, they bring more life, more connection to the animals. And I find even myself more and more just having to have thankfulness for what they provide, and realizing that for us to live, death is a part of life. For us to live, there's death.
Right.
That's true physically, it's true spiritually. And so just appreciating that and realizing that and having thankfulness.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's true of everything, no matter how you eat. Even if you're vegetarian, vegan, it is still true. There is death in order to eat, and so to survive, to live. Yeah. And so definitely have that. But so it's getting harder for you even as you get older. It
is. I have less of and I have to focus more on those principles to take a life, and just to be thankful for what that life is giving us, and sharing that with the kids. We've got young boys; they don't mind so much. Yeah. So, and that's a big help.
Yeah. And nobody
passing
likes
that journey
butchering.
along. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
That's that.
So,
moving on.
Yeah, we'll move along. Okay, so into today's topic, how to plant a garden, and specifically our strategies and how we approach it. And this is going to be a little more just loose, kind of a philosophical, strategical approach than how we write everything down.
So let me start by saying how you do not plan a garden. Do you know how you don't plant a garden? You do not wait until January when you haven't seen any ground at all, And then you open up the pretty seed catalogs and pick out all the prettiest vegetables that show up in the pictures.
What? I thought that's what you do every year.
Well, that's what I do every year, but that's not the right way to plan a garden. That gets you in trouble.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay, but
gotta have some parameters.
Gotta have some parameters.
Right.
Okay, so before January and opening the seed catalog, there's some thought that needs to go into everything.
Well, what space do you have to work with? I mean, you can
Number one,
right. You can only work with the space that you have.
Right.
Now, there's different strategies you can employ for that space, but you're still limited by that space.
Yeah.
So you need to know basically what's your square footage.
Right.
And where. Do you have a big rectangle? Are you planting in different areas?
Mm-hmm.
What's the sun exposure and what's that space and what can you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we start, right?
That's where we start, and that's going to be, that's really going to define a lot of what you can or cannot do right there.
It is, and the next variable that comes into that you have to take into account is, basically soil quality and your environment. A drier environment, sandy environment, you're not going to be able to plant as much in the same square footage as you are maybe in our temperate environment where we've got a nice kind of silty, semi-loamy soil, good moisture throughout the year. And so that's the next step. You have to take how much square footage do you have, how much area, but what's your soil quality?
Well, let's expound on that because I think this is something that I do not see discussed very often in garden theory here, is that people years ago used to dry farm. They used to not have irrigated spaces, even in places that we would consider fairly inhospitable for growing right now.
Yeah.
And the way they were able to do that is with the proper plant spacing.
That was one of the ways.
That was one of the ways that they could do that. And so by spreading your plants out much further than we do traditionally nowadays, they were able to grow a lot just with the moisture that they had in that amount of space in the garden. And the same is true with the nutrient density of your soil, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And they knew back then, before chemical fertilizers ever came along, that they had to build soil. Right. So they put all their manure, they put all their organic material back into the soil and spread it out. You just had to do that, and really that's the only answer, is to build soil. But I want to back up real quick just to give an example that where this really hit home for us. Was traveling in Baja once. If you guys that have followed us know that we like to go down to Baja.
So we've gotten the question when we've said that, where is Baja? Because not everybody's familiar with
Baja is, there's actually two parts of Baja. It's a couple of states in Mexico. And we're talking about Baja Norte and Baja Sur, south of California.
It's very dry and desert-like.
Right, but there's in North Baja, just south of California, there's some wine country. There's actually quite a bit of agriculture, and a lot of it is dry farming. And we came across a winery, and dry farm winery, and he was growing other crops, and that year he was growing watermelons. Dry farming watermelons in the interior of Baja, and it was August. And there was no irrigation.
No irrigation.
The rows were about 20 feet apart, and then each plant was about 10 feet apart. But they were lush and green. You could tell he took care of his soil. And that really impacted me in going, wow, you can do that?
Yeah.
No irrigation there. And the plants look beautiful. Now, he's not getting the crop that we expect as far as quantity and with American industrial agriculture, but he was growing a good, healthy crop.
Right.
And that was a good lesson.
Right.
On the other side, you can also build soil, and this is a strategy that we've gone to and that I've gone to because we need to get a lot out of our square footage, out of our space to provide for ourselves. So the more you can add to your soil and build it up, you can employ some strategies to actually plant quite densely.
Right.
And not even use a ton of moisture. And so it just goes back to square footage and soil amendment, really, are two general strategies. If you're limited, you always want to be building soil, but if you're limited and you need to grow a lot in a limited space, you really need to build your soil with compost and mulch.
Right. So we're getting off on a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I think it's a really good one because it's just a principle that's really not talked about a lot here. So when we're looking at garden planning, we're talking about, one, the space that we have, and two, the quality of our soil as to how much we can plant in that space.
Right. Along with, we want nutrient dense food as well, right? That's one of the reasons a lot of us are growing our own food, because we want to do better than what we can get at the store. And so that's the point, is also increasing that nutritional density.
Right.
So you've got to build soil. That no matter what kind of gardening you employ, back to Eden, lasagna gardening, double dig, till, no till, all these things, you need to be building soil. We all need to be building soil.
Right. Yeah. Good.
Okay, so
then the next consideration that we look at has to do with the kitchen. It has to do with what we eat, what we want to eat, what we need to eat, what foods the people in the house are going to enjoy eating, right?
Right, and really to keep the kitchen, food flowing into the kitchen, our first focus in that is extending the harvest, right? Trying to keep fresh food coming into the kitchen as long as throughout the season and as long of a season as possible, right?
That's right.
You want veggies that are fresh eating as long as possible.
So you guys know we love our preserved foods in all different methods, whether it's dried or fermented or canned. We love that, but as far as nutrient density goes, there's nothing that beats the fresh, right out of the garden. And so we want to be eating fresh as often as we can. We like having salads every day, multiple times a day for meals. And so we like having those growing. So that's a major strategy for us is figuring out how to make that growing season longer and how to have something. And in some areas of the country, that's really a lot easier to do because you have a very temperate climate. In some places, it's a lot harder. Right here, this is a challenging environment to have fresh, especially fresh greens year-round.
Oh, yeah, for year-round
fresh anything,
it is. Right.
So there are some things we're working on with that. But
so that leads to a point you were making before we started talking today, that a lot of people think of gardening as planting one time in the season.
Right.
You need to be planting at least have 3 different planting schedules throughout the season. If you're in a warmer climate, you might even be getting 4 in. And I would say even staggering within those. Like we have our early season, we have our main crop, and we have our fall. So spring, summer, fall, basically.
Right.
But even within those, if you really want to spread it out, you've got to be planting in stages.
In stages, yeah. Because the challenge is that if you say wait and just have one garden season, just that main crop season, like most people, they're going to put their stuff in right after the last frost. And you put in all your spring stuff, your peas and your spinach, at the same time you're putting in your tomatoes and your zucchini. Well, you end up having this huge amount of food that you can hardly handle right in the middle of summer, the end of summer.
Yeah.
But the whole rest of the year, you're not really eating a lot of fresh stuff out of the garden.
Right.
And so really starting in the spring with those things that can handle some frost, your greens, your mustards, your spinaches, kales, different things like that.
Some lettuces, we're finding more and more lettuce varieties. I've got lettuces right now that are coming up, right alongside the mustards, which is really cool.
Yeah, they're coming right up. Your peas, some of those things, the fava beans, all of that can really get you in that early spring.
Then some of your brassicas.
Yeah, your brassicas can go right in, your broccolis, and cabbages and cauliflowers. Those things can all go in right then too. That way you're spreading out that season of eating.
Right. So you're spreading out both your fresh eating, so you've got fresh food as consistently as possible.
Right.
And then you're also trying to spread out your preservation, right? You've got your different preservation methods because we still need to preserve and put food up. We're not going to be eating fresh all year.
Yeah.
And so then you're trying to stagger some of your preservation times.
Right.
And to do that, you're also staggering preservation methods, right? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, you've got the different preservation methods. This is a big one for me, is trying to get away from canning everything. Canning is great, and we love having certain things canned. You guys know I really like the convenience foods, the meals already in a jar. That's just so convenient, so great for a quick grab. But it's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work. It's a lot of energy and requires quite a bit of equipment, a lot of jars. So there are different preservation methods that require less work. You've got the fermenting is a lot quicker, a lot easier on the work side when you're first doing it. it requires a little more maintenance through the year, but it's a lot
It just
easier.
makes me think of the fermented tomatoes you've started doing.
Oh, yeah.
I could live on fermented tomatoes all winter long
Yeah,
as opposed to
they're so
canned
good.
tomatoes. So I love it that you're increasing that
The fermented
the
side.
fermented side. Carrots, there's a lot of those veggies that are just really, really good fermented. They're actually better.
Absolutely.
They're actually healthier. You're building nutrition
Yes.
in that fermentation instead of breaking it down when we can.
Well, in some things you eat the fermented version and you wonder, why is everyone not doing this? Because it's so delicious. It doesn't taste like a pickle. They don't all taste like pickles.
Fermented tomatoes in January, you're like August in the garden.
It
right
is.
there,
It
flashback.
is. They are so fresh. Yeah, if you guys are doing the fermented tomatoes, I know I've been getting a lot of comments from people who are just getting into their fermented tomatoes from last year and are just loving them.
And you've got a great video on
there's
that,
a video on it.
and we'll post it here
Try to put
come
the
up.
link in there,
Toward the end of the video here.
So we have the different preservation methods so that you can kind of move around your work of preserving. It's not all doing the same thing. It's not all over a hot stove in the middle of August or September. But you also have the growing for try and spit this out.
You can do
Growing for root storage or root cellaring.
Yeah,
there we go.
root cellaring.
That's what I'm
Sure.
trying to say. And we're going towards more and more of the types of crops that can be stored in what's called common storage, or kind of traditionally known as a root cellar. Not that you need an actual root cellar to do a lot of them, because they kind of store themselves. So that can be the winter squashes. It can be things like potatoes, your onions, your cabbages, different things that just are gonna cure and then sit on the shelf for you and wait for you.
And your winter squashes, the potatoes, the root crops, you have a little harder time without a traditional root cellar keep getting them through the season. And which we haven't had, so we grow some of our own and get so far, and then we have a local producer. But what does really well without a root cellar is your winter squashes.
Yes.
If you cure them well and get different varieties, and that has been a great season extender. Not having the perfect environment where we've been able to stick them in a cooler closet in the house or right down in the basement this year, and it's not quite as cool in the right temperature, but it works. And we've had winter squash all through the winter. I think we still have some. Or you're just finishing it up.
Absolutely.
So that winter squash has been huge. That's produced a lot of food that took basically almost no preservation method.
It just sits there.
And we've been eating off it all winter.
Yeah, we're still eating off of it right now. It's the end of April, and we're eating off of last year's winter squash.
Filling our hunger gap.
Great condition still. So, and that's sitting on the kitchen floor. That is not like down in some special storage of any sort. That's just sitting in the kitchen.
Right.
So, so I think getting back to the garden planning and how this all fits into that garden planning, thinking about how you can provide food for yourself as long through the season as possible, along with thinking about your preserving season. And one tip I have for people who live in places with a longer main crop season, where you're not getting those frosts, just because you can put a plant in after the last frost doesn't mean you need to. You can stagger that by a few weeks. You do not need to get your cucumbers all ripe right in the heat of mid-September, early September. You can put off planting those for a little bit so that you can be dealing with them when it's still main season crop time, but maybe a little bit cooler. So you're not standing over the stove preserving everything right in the heat of summer.
You also get into, you bring in, just to me, make me think about varieties and the different varieties that you can choose. Even among cucumbers or tomatoes, you have different varieties that mature at different rates.
Right.
You can space out your plantings on those, but you can also space out based on their maturity and whether they're fresh eating or for preserving.
Right.
Like this year we're growing a lot of Roma tomatoes, I think determinate varieties.
Right.
So that all of those are going to come towards harvest in a close window.
Right.
So we can put them all up. But then we're also growing some other varieties that we're going to try to stagger our fresh eating.
Right.
And so really look at your varieties, and you can try to spread out. You can do that with corn. You can do that with beans. A lot of that main crop, you can really spread out that harvest or bunch it up so that say, okay, I want to can tomatoes. I don't want to be having to deal with a little bit of tomatoes all year long for canning. That's great for fresh eating. But you want to really try to get that all in a window.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I know this year we're doing 3 different varieties of pickling cucumbers, and they mature at about 2 weeks apart from each other. so that, you know, you're not just hit with all of them all at once. You can kind of take a big cluster now, and then a few weeks later you have another big cluster, and a few weeks later you have a little bit more.
Can you keep talking? I need to just step out for just, I'm not going far.
Okay.
So.
Oh, we've got a technical. I didn't do a great job at keeping talking. Sorry.
That's all right. Just wanted to check time. I couldn't see the time. Something came up.
Okay.
Yeah, and got in the way there. And we are getting down on time. Are there any other key points that we want to share?
I think another last major one is don't grow something that your family's not going to eat. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Like maybe grow a little sampling, because it's surprising when it's homegrown what you actually like versus when it's bought out of a store. I know the first time I ate store-bought Swiss chard, I thought it was the worst thing ever because I'd been eating our homegrown Swiss chard, and I thought that was just like horrible. So the reverse is true too, that if you've been eating it out of the grocery store, you might try a little trial plot to see if you might like it, but don't grow it if you're not going to eat it.
Well, and another tip is what grows easy for you, what grows in your area, what's easy to grow. Try to find what you like combined with what grows well. And past that, if you've got farmers markets or any kind of grower in your area, what can you buy quality and it's not very expensive in your area? Here we have some folks that produce great root crops.
Right.
Potatoes, carrots, parsnips, beets, and some brassicas that do cabbages, and they're organic and they are good stewards of the soil, and it's a fantastic price.
Right.
So as much as we could actually grow those pretty well, especially now in this plot, we are growing some. We're not going to focus on those as heavily because we have a good source.
Right.
And so there's other things that we can be putting our energy into, and so it's kind of a balancing act of putting those different pieces together to maximize and get the most value out of your effort.
Right. Good.
Yeah. So
any wrap-up thoughts on that? That's pretty good.
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of our main strategies, the things that we think about as we're going through, planning. Just one wrap up, keep records. We're not really talking about a record keeping system here, but we keep records and write down, what we grew, how long it took to come up, how it did for us. We're always trying different varieties and playing with things and adding to our staples.
Right.
And every season's different, so you really just want to keep good records so over the years you can look back. And
even if it's as simple as just recording the varieties that you've grown that year, and then maybe at the end of the year making some notes on whether you liked it or not, even that will get you a lot of information.
And there's lots of good planners out there and nifty little tools, and those are great, but just a spiral bound folder and write the date in and what you did and what you observed. That's it. That's all we use, and it works great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyways, that's some of our gardening tips and strategies for planning.
I think in wrap up, I would say begin with the end in mind. Think about what you want in the kitchen, what you want to end up with food wise, and start there when you're planning your garden.
Now, see, this is going to go on. You made me think.
I'm sorry.
You made me think of one more. No, it's good, but there is one more. Gardening season doesn't end at harvest. And you need to put your garden to bed. If you want to make spring easier, take your plants down, mulch them up, get them composting, mulch your beds, cover them, let them rest. Soil, especially in temperate climates, is most active when the thaw is happening. That's when your biology really gets going. So if you've got your compost in the fall, and you've got mulch in on the fall, and you've put your beds to rest, before you even get out there, that stuff's going to start breaking down. That is way more productive than doing it in the spring rush, which we're doing right now because we have to.
Because we weren't here in the
fall.
fall.
But we will set up these beds. And so that's a kind of a closing tip when you close out your season. Try to put everything to rest. Try to get your amendments in the fall. And not only is that better for your soil, it's going to make your spring rush as you're getting going a lot easier.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Good.
Okay.
Remember to send in any ideas you have for Pantry Chats. We are reading them. I know, you guys, we do not get to a lot of comments on YouTube. We're just so busy. We try to hit every comment on Facebook.
And we do read most of them.
We do. We do try to read them.
Try to read them, and especially here on the Pantry Chats, because we want your guys' feedback and we want your questions. Helps us know what's going to benefit you to be sharing and talking about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And give the video a thumbs up if you liked it.
Yeah, share if you would.
It.
Yeah. help us keep growing.
Next
we are.
week,
oh, hey, you know, we're getting close to 100,000 too.
We are getting really close to 100,000 on YouTube.
On YouTube. So love it. Just the more you guys share,
and
get that going and help us get to 100,000. That'd be really exciting.
That would be really neat. So next time on a Pantry Chat, we are going to be talking about what our day looks like, right?
Yeah, and centered around children and chores, right? And how children fit into the homestead.
Absolutely. We're going to be putting that in there and talking about all those things. So if you have any specific questions regarding that, leave it in the comments here too, and we'll be reading those before we film next week's Pantry Chat.
Pantry Chat.
Right. Okay, you guys.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you soon.
Goodbye.